It's Motivational Monday here on the Step by Step Listening page, YouTube channel, and also in Manager Critic group. So a gorgeous welcome. Today I want to talk about making sense of why you're experiencing overwhelm, but also practical things you can do about it. It's pretty normal. It happens to all of us. However, there are some things that if you just understand how the brain works, it can really make sense of that. So that's what I want to do today. Is I want to share with you a model that I came across when I started working with a lady called Caitlin Walker about 10 years ago. And just having this model meant that when I had an experience that I didn't always have language for, it gave me a way of communicating to myself, first of all. So those of you who haven't read the book, Manager Critic, From Overwhelm to Clarity in 7 Steps, it gave me a way of communicating to myself in a more effective way. It gave me a way of actually giving myself better feedback. But also when I started working with my clients, it helped me to understand what they needed in order for us to be able to work and learn at our best together. And when I started coaching and facilitating groups, all of those tools were resourceful. So it's been a massive tool for me. And what I find with my clients, and we were just starting day one of the Make It Happen Motivator course today. And it's the very first thing that we do. In the very first day, we start looking at what we need to stay curious. And we talk about this model so that we as a group and as a collective have a common language, that we understand that if this is our experience, we can come to the group and talk about it without any shame, without any judgment, so that we can start to make sense of our experience and basically set ourselves up for more success. So if you're joining me today, please comment. If you haven't given StreamYard permission, just pop your name so that I know who it is that's with us today. I can see one person on live, but with your permission, I'm going to share with you just a couple of the slides actually from Make It Happen Motivator this morning that hopefully will help you make sense of what's happening with overwhelm. So without any further ado, let me add the PowerPoint and I will just go through these points with you. So here is a model developed by Paul MacLean, I think in the 1960s. It is not an accurate model now. We know a lot more about neuroscience. However, as a metaphor, as a way of describing how the brain operates and what it does, it is a really good tool for making sense of overwhelm. So if you imagine there's parts of the brain that you've got, the reptilian brain, that's the fight, flight or freeze. This is the stuff about keeping you safe. It's about making sure you've got enough water, that you've got enough warmth, that you've got enough protection, ultimately that you are safe. Then that things that will trigger that brain is, for example, in the pandemic, if you've lost your job, then you may well go into flight, flight or freeze, where you'll find yourself either just clamming up and you can't say anything. You might find yourself just arguing, shouting, ranting, really, really angry. You might find yourself just wanting to get out. Well, obviously right now when we're supposed to be staying at home and keeping the NHS safe and all that sort of stuff, a lot of our natural responses, things that we may have done to give ourselves space away from our current stresses or challenges, is not available to us. So one of the reasons we can get into overwhelm is because our system believes that we're under threat. And therefore, what I do with my clients, and one of the practical things you can do, is start paying attention to, if you have this trigger where you have this kind of there's no language to explain it, it's often a feeling. I have this sort of overwhelming feeling that I just want to get out of here. And so it's not so much nowadays, but in the past when I first knew about this stuff, I'd just get in the car and have to drive to the beach. I just needed to get away from the situation or the space that I was in right now. So when it all gets too much, my default mechanism was often to run away. Other people, it might be to argue. Mine, I tend to be more of a sort of shout at myself, slam the door and want to get away rather than shouting at people. Other people are just completely freeze, withdraw. So if you notice that that's happening for you, just be aware that that's your, what could you be saying? What do you need to do, see or hear in order to settle your brain, to let your brain know that you are safe? Now, here's the reality. Even if you are at risk of losing your property, if you want to be able to get through it with clarity and confidence, you want to be able to create some change, having a conversation with yourself or other people about how awful it is may put you into that reptilian brain. Now, that's not to say that we don't have to acknowledge our feelings. It's really good to talk about them. But if we are continually telling that story and we're putting ourselves into this flight, or freeze state, our body is then being flooded with stress chemicals, which means we're running on adrenaline, which is not sustainable long term. And so if we've got that happening, one of the things I want you to think about is what might be right now putting you into the red brain. You know, what is it that's leaving you feeling unsafe? And thinking about what might send you there. And one of the things you can ask yourself is, what happened just before you had the flight, or freeze? And when you start tracking it, keeping a journal on it, you might start to notice some patterns. And for me, what I've noticed with myself is something can just not work. The first time it's okay. The second time it doesn't work, it's like, And the third time it happens, it becomes a big thing. And what I've learned is that I need to pay attention to it when it first doesn't work and make a conscious decision what I'd like to have happen. But what tends to happen is it like feels a bit uncomfortable, don't like it, but I ignore it. Second time it happens, I feel a bit uncomfortable and a bit more don't like it. And then the third time it happens, it's almost like my system goes, right, this is becoming a pattern. This is not sustainable. And so if it carried on, it would become not life-threatening, but my system doesn't feel safe. So I know for me personally that in order to keep myself out of red brain, I need to pay attention to the patterns that are happening, and I need to notice it and ask myself. So things I need to do is go, okay, so when it's like that, what would I like to have happen and what works about it, so that I can just settle my system and actually reassure my system that I'm actually okay, that, you know, I might be worried about something, but I'm not in mortal danger at all. Now the other part of the brain, I'm just going to check we haven't got any comments to see if anybody's there. No comments at the moment. Fabs. So the other part of the brain is the mammalian brain. This is the part where there's an emotional reaction, but it's often more subtle than flight, or freeze. And you'll have more of an inner dialogue, and you'll have people call it sort of feeling stuck, where you're worried about the rules or you're worried about what you think. So a mild version of this might be you're in a training session and you're needing to go to the loo, so your reptilian brain's starting to worry about whether you're going to get to go to the loo. You're not yet there. It's not like, oh my God, I can't go. But your brain's now starting to think, when is the break going to be? And so you're not really listening, you're not really present in that training, you're not staying curious because you're now trying to work out when is okay. Or maybe it hasn't been very clear what order things are going to happen, or whether you should be taking notes, or whether you're going to be asked questions. And so your system starts to get unsettled because you're not sure what the rules are. Maybe you're asking questions, but the answer you get in your head, you don't want to say it out loud because you're worried about what other people think. That's more the mammalian brain. And whilst if we've got a lot of that going on and we've unsettled, our brain can often go into reptilian because we just don't understand the rules, we don't know the boundaries. And this is the part of the brain that basically we are a pack mentality, we're meant to be as a collective. But our brain gets to feel safe when it knows what the rules are. So and we develop the rules based on getting feedback and accumulating patterns of reactions. So if someone says to you, oh, you can just tell me as it is, and then you tell them as it is and they scream at you, the rule might be verbally said, you can say it as it is, but actually your reptilian brain might go, well, actually that's not the rule, because when I do that you shout. Well, that's because you may have a rule that when you can say it as it is, people aren't going to react in that way. And so we start to get in conflict between what the rules and what aren't the rules. And right now, what I'm speaking to lots of people is, at the beginning of the year, there's a lot of people that got thrown into homeschooling, a lot of people that were thrown into furlough, so they went from having sort of really busy jobs to not having anything to do. We've had people who are used to being around lots of people by travelling and spending time with family, who are having to spend a lot of time on their own. People who like to have time on their own, that are confined in houses with lots of people. There's been lots of change going on. And as the year's gone on, we've sort of settled down to what the rules are going to be. But one of the biggest things I think that we've always challenged with is everybody wanted to think it was going to be just 6 weeks, but actually it's probably going to be a year or 18 months maybe before we actually get back to any sort of sense of freedom of travel, or freedom of visiting people as we were before, and back to hugging and connecting with people in person. So right now the brain is in mammalian brain, trying to work out what the rules are. So right now you might be planning Christmas and trying to work out, how does that work for me, what am I going to do? But if you think that you might put yourself or your family in danger, that your decisions could jeopardize somebody else, i.e. cause them to get COVID, or cause them not to have work, etc., then you probably would end up very close to the reptilian brain. So I want you to think about right now what's happening in your world that might send you into mammalian brain. Listening to that dialogue, what's the conversations you're having about, not sure what the rules are, don't know how to sort of how to play the game, so to speak. How you might be part of a new group, you might have joined a new networking group. Maybe it's just about working out how you're going to do Christmas this year. It might be thinking about how you're going to do your, it might be learning new technology if you're going to continue to be virtual for the rest of next year. So what is the learning that's going on, and what's the new rules that you're having to work your way through? Because once you've established those rules and you decide this is how you play your life, that's how you're going to work to it, it becomes much easier to operate in the green and the blue brain, so that you're actually able to be able to think with clarity and confidence. So just thinking now, what might you need to hear and see to settle your state when in a green brain? And then the last part of the brain, which is the front part here, the neocortex blue brain. This is when we're able to think creatively, we're able to problem solve. And the big challenge we've got is if we're in mammalian brain or we're in reptilian brain, what generally happens is oxygen and blood comes from the neocortex brain to flood to the part of the brain to check that we're safe. Will I get attacked? Do I belong in this group? Have I got enough food? Am I going to be safe? Can I survive? And all the time that we're in those, the blue or the green or the red brain, we're actually taking oxygen and blood from the front of the brain, where we need to be able to think and problem solve. And it also therefore impacts our ability to remember things as well, because we're taking it away from the brain that actually does memory recall. Because when we're in fight, or survival, we don't need to remember stuff, we just need to act and do and take action. So it's very reactive. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure we find ways of getting here. And one of the questions that we work on step-by-step listening is curiosity. Actually, what is it like when you're being curious? That's like what? And how do you need to be in order for you to be curious like that? And so I want to leave you those questions today, because if you are in overwhelm and you are feeling unsettled all the time and you're feeling disorientated, before you can even make decisions, you have to learn how to manage your brain state. You have to think about what support or resource do you need to either provide for yourself or ask somebody else for in order to manage your state. And sometimes just changing the way that we talk to ourselves, which is what the book Manager Critics is about. It's about changing your self-talk. Sometimes it's hearing it from somebody else outside of you that says, look, you're okay. Everything is fine. It's not nice, it's unsettling, it's not how we'd like it to be, but your life is not in danger. You are going to be safe. So I want to leave you with the questions then, thinking about neocortex brain, the blue brain. I often call it the clarity brain. My coach and mentor calls it learning brain. But I want you to think about curiosity for you is like what? And when curious, you are like what? And when you start to think about, what kind of resource or support do you need to stay curious, that's when you can manage your brain state. That's when you can be more playful with the challenges that we have in life. And that's when you can start to be able to manage your overwhelm more effectively. So without any further ado, if you haven't got any questions, I will just check before I log off. If you've got any questions, please pop them below. But if you are struggling with overwhelm, please get in touch. Okay, I've got a couple more days before I shut down. I will be closing down on the 11th of December and taking a couple of weeks off over the Christmas period, and I'll be offline as well. But if you have got any questions at all regarding overwhelm and you'd like more clarity of what you want and the confidence to make it happen, then please get in touch. Have a great week. Speak to you soon.